in the previous lesson, we rendered 3 taco card components to the screen by invoking the map method on our tacos array. That map method allowed us to generate an array of JSX, more specifically an array of 3 taco card components, which React rendered sequentially onto the screen. So while there are no issues or errors in the app and it is functional, I do want to show you that if we open up our browser console, we will see a warning from React. So I'm going to go to Inspect, then Console. And right here, we're going to see this red warning that reads, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So you're only going to see this error, or more specifically warning, because it's not quite an error. It's not going to crash your app. It's just something that React would really like to inform you about. And this warning will only occur when you have the map method being invoked on an array. It doesn't matter what kind of JSX you are returning from your map function. It could be a component, or it could be a top-level JSX element like an H1 or a P. It doesn't really matter. You're still going to see this issue. And you'll see here it says each child in a list, which really means each thing we return from our nested map function should have a unique key prop. And key is actually the literal prop that React wants us to add on the top level thing or element that we are returning from every function. So basically, what React is asking us to add right here is a literal prop called key. So let me write it out here, and we'll provide the equal sign, and we'll talk in a second about what we're actually going to give here. But first up, I want to explain the why. What is the reason why React wants a key prop? So as we know, React is responsible for building up a user interface. And that means that React can add elements to the DOM. It can remove elements from the DOM. It can update existing elements, maybe, for example, adding a CSS class, or maybe replacing text. We are not familiar with all of these React features just yet, but trust me, they are all things that we can do within the React ecosystem. And in order to do that, React needs to keep track of the elements and the component hierarchy that we have and understand which parts have changed and which parts have stayed constant. So what the key prop allows it to do is to do that more effectively and more efficiently. It's basically React asking us for help. And what React would like whenever we use the map method is that we provide each element a unique identifier. That is what key is supposed to represent. It's just a unique ID that React can use to tell the elements apart. Because at the end of the day, we're going to have 3 taco cards, and React says, hey, can you help me figure out which one of these taco cards is which? Because you're just giving me 3 taco cards. Now, obviously, we as human beings can identify that the taco cards have different titles and can have different images. But imagine, just for the sake of example, that all 3 tacos have the same name property and the same image property, which would translate to the same value for the name prop and the image prop. And in that case, we would have 3 basically identical looking taco cards, but yet they would be 3 different objects in memory, and similarly 3 taco cards that need to be rendered to the screen. So React starts to struggle with which one is which, especially when it's comparing what needs to change on the screen and what needs to be updated. This is especially true when we get to things like removing elements from the screen. So maybe, for example, the user has the ability to create a new taco. This is a terrible example, but just for the sake of example. So maybe the user can add a taco, and that will be a new taco that is added to our tacos array. Or maybe the user can remove a taco, and that represents an element being removed from the middle of our tacos array, which of course also impacts a taco card being removed from the screen. So in those kinds of situations, React will struggle to identify the differences between the elements unless we give it some help. That's really as much description as I can give, because the kind of lower level details are not too important to know. The point is, for this key prop, React just needs you to give it some kind of a unique identifier. And that can be a number, it can be a string. It just needs to be something that's going to be different on every single iteration so that React can distinguish the 3 taco cards from each other. All right. So in our case, one thing or one attribute that is always unique in our scenario is the taco name, because every single time we iterate, the name property is a totally different taco name. So right here for the key, I can provide my curly braces, And knowing that we have access to the taco, I can once again access the name property and say to React, hey, here's your unique identifier. So it doesn't really matter what this is. This could, for example, be a key of 1 for the first taco, a key of 2 for the second taco, and a key of 3 for the third taco. It doesn't matter what data type you use, as long as you can guarantee that it is going to be unique on every single iteration. And in our case, name is a perfect candidate. So now you'll notice as soon as I provide a key prop and I refresh the page, we'll see that the issue goes away. I do want to show you a variation of this issue. So for example, if I get rid of taco.name right here and I provide a hard-coded value of 1, like so, in this case, we are giving taco card a key of 1, but there's actually going to be 3 iterations going on here, right? There's 3 taco cards, and now all 3 of them will have an identical value for the key prop of 1. So now we're going to get a different error in the console, and it's going to say, encountered 2 children with the same key 1. Keys should be unique so that components maintain their identity across updates. Non-unique keys may cause children to be duplicated and or omitted. Once again, React is just saying, hey, if you don't give me something that I can use to identify uniqueness between these taco cards, I'm going to struggle with my internal logic, my internal algorithm, right? So having an absent key is a problem, and having a duplicate key is also a problem. React needs a key prop set to a value that will be unique for each iteration. In other words, unique for every taco card that we return from the function here, or whatever element we have here. If this was an H1 or a P tag, it would be no different. The syntax looks exactly the same. We just provide a key prop set to something unique. So in this case, I'm going to return back to taco.name, clear this and save. Let me save this, refresh the page, and now we can see we're back to normal. Now, typically, what you're going to use for your key is going to be an ID of a record. In this scenario, we are pretending as if we got this data from a backend. We don't really have a backend, but usually when you're going to get data from an API, each record is going to have a unique identifier. So for example, if you're using a traditional relational database, it's likely that, for example, the first taco will have an ID of 1, and the second taco will have an ID of 2, and the third will have an ID of 3. So there's nothing wrong with using the taco's name right here because it is a unique identifier, but usually the database record, which is going to be the ID, is typically the most likely to never change because it's typically the unique identifier for that record in the database table. So a very common pattern that you're going to see is referencing the ID property if your object or your data has that information available. Once again, there's nothing wrong with name. I'm just saying it's more likely than not in a real world, especially if this data is coming from somewhere else, that each record in that data will have a unique identifier naturally, and that's typically going to be called something like ID, and that's what you're going to use in your code. All right, and with that, once again, the error goes away. So once again, to summarize everything, because this could be a little bit of a complex topic in React, whenever you're using the map method and you're returning some bit of JSX from the function that you pass to map, React will give you a warning if you do not provide a key prop on your topmost returned element. And that element could be a regular HTML element or a component like we have in this case. It doesn't matter. React wants a key prop, literally called key, and the value should be unique for every single iteration. It doesn't matter whether we have 3 iterations like we have here or 100. The point is on every single function call, we should have a different value for that key prop so that React can identify the differences between the return elements, and that will help React in its algorithm when it's determining what has changed and what needs to be updated. Typically, you do not want to give the key prop some kind of complex thing like an object or an array. You're looking for a simple data type like a number or a string that is going to be unique on every iteration. And ideally, that should come from the element that you are iterating over in the original array. Something you can take from the element in a given iteration that will prove unique. In this case, we have 2 options. We have the ID and the name. You could even argue the image as a potential candidate, but obviously when we're dealing with JPEG images, it doesn't kind of feel right to use that as an identifier. But ID and name in this scenario are perfect candidates because they are different for each one of our tacos, which makes them great as the relative values in each iteration of the map method for that key prop. And once you solve that problem, the issue will go away. And once again, you're going to allow React to do its job more elegantly and avoid any potential errors. So obviously the library wants some help from us. Let's go ahead and give it the help that it needs. All right, that's all there is to cover in this lesson. So I will see you in the next one.